Welcome to the supplementary video for Chapter 1, The Challenge of Organizational Communication. Make sure you read through this list at the beginning of each chapter so you know what to focus on. All the quiz items for every chapter are based on these lists of things you should understand from each chapter, so it's a nice reference point to guide your study. And just a reminder, these videos are intended to complement, not replace, your reading of the textbook. There's a lot of details in each chapter I won't cover in these videos because the material is pretty straightforward and you're certainly capable of reading on your own. My goal here is just to highlight the key ideas and explain some of the more difficult content, as well as provide some additional commentary about the material. Just remember that your reading of the whole chapter, guided by the list at the beginning, is still the primary learning mechanism for our online class. Okay. Chapter 1 starts with a good way to think about life here in the 21st century. It's complicated. Our politics are complicated, our families are complicated, our economy is complicated. And all this complication is certainly present in the world of organizational communication. Communication is so much more complicated than it used to be just a decade or two ago. And organizing and the world of work are certainly more complicated than anything our grandparents or even our parents could have anticipated. Now, several things complicate our world today, especially as they relate to organizational communication. Our textbook highlights 4 key issues: globalization, terrorism, climate change, and changing demographics. In today's global economy, almost everything is interconnected. Change and disruption are everywhere we look, affecting nearly every industry and sector. Since 9/11, the threat of terrorism has dominated our politics, our foreign policy, and our understanding of security. The reality of climate change impacts many aspects of our economy and is likely to have long-lasting and perhaps irreversible effects on the way of life for millions of people across the world. And changing demographics means that our workplaces and communities will look very different in the near future, especially here in America, where we're getting older, more urban, more diverse in our family makeups, and on track to be a majority-minority nation. All this means that communicating and organizing are very complicated, and there are very few straightforward answers about what makes for effective organizational communication. In response, we need to complicate our thinking about both organizations and communication. And that's what we're going to start doing in this chapter, and what we're trying to accomplish in this class overall, to develop a more nuanced and insightful understanding of organizational communication for these complicated times we live in and for the complicated world you're about to enter as you finish college and embark on your various professional and personal endeavors. First, we have to complicate our thinking about organizations. We can't just think of the traditional business organization that dominated the industrial landscape for so long, depicted straightforwardly in their buildings, factories, and corporate headquarters. Today, organizations come and go very quickly, and there are all sorts of complicated financial and ownership arrangements, making it difficult to figure out who is responsible and how things work. People have a variety of short-term and contractual relationships with organizations, and technology enables many people to work from anywhere in the world. So it's difficult to figure out exactly who is in an organization and where the organization actually is. Plus, there are countless nonprofit and non-governmental organizations who work both independently and in a variety of partnerships with governments, private companies, and each other, blurring lines of authority and legal responsibility. All this makes for a very complicated organizational landscape, and our understanding of this landscape must be equally complicated. Second, we have to complicate our thinking about communication. Traditionally, our understanding of communication has been informed by a transmission model of communication, conceptualized in terms of senders, receivers, messages, and channels. And although this model is accurate in a limited sense, it is woefully inadequate for the complexities of our modern world. In contrast, communication scholars emphasize a constitutive model of communication, where communication actually constitutes our social realities, with much more emphasis on meaning and interpretation. Communication is all about social construction, not just the linear transmission of information. We'll learn much more about this in Chapter 5. But for now, we want to focus on the basic contrast between a transmission model of communication and a constitutive model of communication. And you can learn more about what this contrast means for our understanding of organizational communication in another animated video called what is organizational communication, that you also need to watch as part of the material for week 1. So that's it for Chapter 1. It's a good idea to look over these questions at the end of the chapter, especially if you need ideas for your discussion board participation this week. In Chapter 2, we'll take a look back at some of the classical approaches to organizational communication that provide the foundation for how we think about today's world of organizational communication.